I like the word congenial because it fits well into one of the topics that I don't think I speak often enough here, but it is basically, it's a word that means it's kind of, it fits personally to me, or I have a personal relationship with something. And I think when it comes to investing, we are incredibly keen on finding congenial investments. And I want to discuss this topic within the context of the question, should we buy Facebook now? Because Facebook has announced something very interesting. They changed their name. And I think the name change, of course, is just the peak of the iceberg. Here, there's a lot of things going on with Facebook. And we decided not to pursue this opportunity. And I think it's because Facebook is not a congenial investment. That's why. And this is what I want to discuss in this episode. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's November 1st, 2021. This is Krim Delco. For the day, the fund is up 11.8%. The market's up 20 basis points. For the year, we are up 59%. The market's up 20.9%. We're outperforming by 38.1%. The main outperformance comes from Tesla, which is up roughly 9% today for the day, contributing about roughly 10% to the fund, and the biotech index adding another 1%. The Tesla story keeps just getting better and better. I've discussed this on Friday. We believe this is the beginning of a new massive appreciation in market cap. I think we're going into territories that are very difficult to fathom. And that's because what Tesla is doing is not just changing the way we drive cars or things like that. It is fundamentally changing the energy infrastructure of the US and further on of the world. And I think this is just something where we still have to wrap our head around what kind of valuation we can give to something like that. And the market is much better than individuals. And I want to leave it at that because we don't have the right answer. There's no formula. I've discussed this in the Paul Feyerabend discussion in the previous episode, where we discussed the fact that science, analysis. Also, we spoke about Thomas Mann saying, and you can analyze yourself into the abyss. Analysis, rationality, all these things are very good tools, but we just don't have. They're not enough to understand something like Tesla. They're not enough to understand reality in the first place. We need other tools, and if the other tools are not available, then we are in uncharted territory. And as investors, we're happy to take that risk because we believe that focusing on the cost of iteration is a good proxy. It's not enough. Fundamental analysis and rationality are not enough to define what will generate wealth and how much, but it's a good starting point, and this is where we live with Tesla and the biotech index. But now let's talk about congenial investments, or the actual concept of having an investment that personally fits to you, that is personal to you. Investing is a very personal subject matter, and a lot of people might bark at this and say, what is this? It's a very rational thing. There's nothing more rational than Wall Street, etc., etc. Well, I've just refuted that in the previous episode and in the prelude today. I don't think so. I don't think rationality and all these tools that we have, that we learn in business schools and finance, they're not enough to understand wealth creation, because wealth creation is fundamentally a natural process that comes from a Darwinian selection of finding niches that then make, let's say in the case of business, a company is a startup, a VC-backed startup is really, in a Darwinian context, a species that finds a niche and then evolves its own DNA, its own processes and knowledge and the knowledge creation, all these things around this new problem within the context of, let's say, if the ecology is the business world, so this particular startup finds a new problem to solve and then solves the problem and therefore evolves into this new niche. And if the niche is large enough, like in the case of Tesla, where we're talking about a niche of transportation and energy, which are massive markets, well, then we're in a situation where we can have massive wealth creation. But fundamentally, what I'm trying to say here, which is very important, is that we don't have rational tools per se to fully understand investing. And that's where congenial, the word congenial, comes into place. Because it's a lot more than just saying, well, this fits to me, this is my personality, or I resonate with that investment. Of course, this is what we're saying as humans in the first place. But under the hood here, what's hidden is what people like David Edelman talk about, which is we really have a lot more processing power to our disposal than just the frontal cortex. And we are able to understand certain things much better without being able to formulate them. And even David Deutsch would say, well, if I can program it, I understand it. That's right, that's true. I would say that's true in a sort of an engineering context where I can build it. I understand it to the extent where I can build it, fine. But I think there's a lot of things in life that we understand that we can't program, we can't build, we can't even formulate. Finding the right spouse, finding something to do for our kids, finding something to invest in, finding a profession maybe even. All these things, they are, I would say, a lot more complex and a lot more difficult to analyze with pure rational means, and therefore we need other tools, and that's what we have. We have our skin, we have our senses, we have a lot of processing power to our disposal beyond the frontal cortex. And the frontal cortex is almost like the rider of the elephant, which is, okay, fine, it is sort of the amalgamation of all the thoughts and intelligence and all these things that we accumulate in our body, and then they kind of get filtered through our frontal cortex, and then something comes out of there, and a lot of good things come out of there. The theory of relativity came out of there, the Sharpe ratio in finance, the efficient frontier and Harry Markowitz, the accounting methods that the Italians evolved in the Renaissance. All these things are incredibly good tools for businesses, but they're not the whole story. And I think the word congenial is therefore a very important word, because it just summarizes that there are sometimes things that just fit us, and we feel it, we know it's good for us, but we can't really understand why. And this is where I want to leave this part of the discussion and now jump into the question, should we buy Facebook or not? Let's just use this whole analysis that I just did for a very particular case study, and that Facebook. Facebook last week announced a new name. They want to call themselves Meta. Zuckerberg is basically what's called pivoting in Silicon Valley. He's going from one business to the next. This is all good and fine, and these are things that we as Orange Capital Partners look at very carefully. When people change course, there is sometimes potential for wealth creation. Namely, Microsoft was such an investment that we actually did, and really also very successfully did. It was a very good investment for us, because when they put Satya Nadella in place, they changed the way they do business. They got rid of the Windows monopoly and opened themselves up, and also were able to catch on the wave of cloud computing, and therefore became a growth stock again, and today they're one of the most valuable companies in the world. So are we in this type of situation, or are we not? We decided to not invest in Facebook because of one particular reason, and that is that we don't see the problem that Mark Zuckerberg is solving. He is trying to build a company that is going to grow with the metaverse. That's what that's why it's called Meta. And that's all nice, and that's why I said it's an interesting concept that we want to look at. But what we miss here is a little bit the problem or the necessity that Zuckerberg is solving. In other words, when he built Facebook, he was solving a very simple problem. He wanted to connect people on campus. Once he connected people on campus, they went outside of campus and started connecting other people, and next thing you know, lo and behold, you have Facebook. In this case, I'm not so sure what problem he's solving. I'm not so sure if he has the actual skills and the necessity and the mindset and all these things that are necessary to solve the problem. Now, having said that, the one thing that speaks for Facebook and always will be a very, very important part of our investment thesis, it is the ability, the will, and the potential to iterate. And that's definitely something that Facebook has. Facebook is amazing at that. Why am I saying that? I've never worked there. I did look at them as an investor from the outside, and I got the feeling that Facebook is is kind of like a person. If Facebook was a person, it would be a person that is very difficult to pin down. You don't really know what the personality is of that company. But one thing you know for sure is that this particular person, now again, assuming Facebook was a person, this person is incredibly good at changing, adapting, and solving problems in a very adaptive, rapid way. Why? And this is something I got from the guy who runs Software Engineering Daily. I forgot his name, but he wrote a book about how Facebook works. And he said that they're very good at building teams that self-assemble around problems. Now, when I hear these things, these are all things that I absolutely carefully listen to, because again, like I said in the prelude, while we don't have a good rational way of understanding how wealth creation works, we do have certain clues, and one of them is lowering the cost of iteration is one of the things that, in my view, drives down cost, increases the rate of disruption massively. Now, why aren't we investing in Facebook? Because we believe that within the software business, the rate of iteration, the cost of iteration is relatively low by definition. So that in itself is not an advantage, while it is a big advantage for Tesla because they're dealing with hardware and physics and engineering. So the rate of innovation there, cost of iteration has to be lowered through real ingenuity, versus in software I think it's a little bit easier because you're not dealing with hardware stuff, and you can break things much faster and fix them. So having said that, of course, the one thing that the Tesla has, hopefully this is not a Freudian mistake what I just made. The one thing that Facebook has is this ability to self-assemble around problems. So while iteration is cheap, what is very, very difficult in the software business is finding the right problems. Because you can iterate, because iteration is cheap, you can kind of iterate, let's say your space of potential iteration is very high, and therefore it's maybe very difficult to find things to iterate around. And this is one of the things that I think inhibits a lot of software companies. So software companies are different than physical companies in the sense that physical companies know what problems to solve, but it's relatively difficult to solve them, and iteration can be very costly. So the edge comes from having a way to lower the cost of iteration, such as Tesla again. Within the software business, it's the other way around. In the software business, I think solving the problem is not so difficult, but finding the right problem to solve that's the problem. Because your space is so vast, you're sort of, if you want the problem space, which is the space of all potential problems you could solve, so which ones are you going to solve? And this is where Facebook is very good at in terms of self-assembly around problems. This is exactly what the organization of Facebook, I think, makes it very strong, is that they were able, within the context of their business, of course, and their money-making abilities and all that stuff, to self-assemble around problems that are relevant for the company, and that's why they were able to grow and sort of 10x the stock since IPO. Having said that, now if I have a CEO like Mark Zuckerberg coming out and explicitly naming that we're going to do now this versus that, I have to say I'm a bit suspicious. Now, of course, we have one analogy here, which is Google. They did it. And if you look at the Google case study, you would make two conclusions. One, this pivoting away from Google to Alphabet was a huge waste of money, because all these other projects, including Waymo, in my view, are not worth it. However, the Google stock itself did very well because Google as a business did extremely well. So if you use that analogy, you could say, well, whatever Mark Zuckerberg is trying to do, it's not going to work, it's a waste of time and this and that. But I think he wouldn't do it if he didn't know that his core business is incredibly strong. That is one way, but I don't think we should reason by analogy here, because we have a one case study, so n equals 1. I don't think you can then extrapolate from there, and therefore we don't want to do that. We just want to focus on Facebook and see how is Facebook now a better investment than before. What were the reasons we don't like Facebook? Well, one of the reasons we don't like Facebook is because we don't like the personality of Mark Zuckerberg, and that's still the case. What is it we don't like about Mark Zuckerberg? We believe he's not an honest person, and therefore this congenial investment, this concept, it just doesn't fit with us. He's not a criminal. I don't think he should go to jail or anything like that. It just doesn't fit us. We are more the types that, we like to invest with people like Elon Musk, with Jennifer Doudna, with Rodolphe Barangu. Those are the types of people that we like to be associated with when we invest, and not necessarily Mark Zuckerberg. And that this, again, I can't analyze it more rationally than just saying it's not a congenial investment for us. We like the self-assembly around problems. That is something we do actually appreciate. And again, but that's, in a sense, if you have this ability to self-assemble around problems, so why do you need to explicitly change your name? Then why don't you just self-assemble around problems? It gives us a sense that maybe what they're trying to do is sort of force it from the top down. So the self-assembly around problems might not be working. Actually, maybe this is a sign that it's not working as well anymore, and that we need the interaction from upstairs to really, really force everybody into this new type of mindset. It can work. Like again, Microsoft was a good example. Satya Nadella changed the mindset of the company and opened up Microsoft to the cloud, and that was a very successful pivot. So maybe it can work here too. And I'm not saying Facebook is a bad investment, but again, it's not a congenial investment as far as we're concerned, and we're very, very focused on that, because for us, this is it's a signal to us that we have a good potential way to generate wealth with this type of investment if it's congenial to us. So to summarize, this episode is about the concept of having congenial investments. The reason we pay a lot of attention to that is because having an investment that feels right to us is really part of our analysis, because we believe that rational thinking and rational analysis is bounded, and therefore it's not the whole story, and we have to, as investors, and this is the beauty of being experienced, to having been around more than a decade, in actually, well, we've been around even more than that, 2 decades plus, because we just started like 12, 13 years ago, but we've been around much more than that, and therefore we've had this incredible learning process. And this is also why we believe investing is actually one of those businesses where tenure is important, because you need to build this ability to select congenial investments. And this is the main reason why we're not investing in Facebook. It's a good investment maybe for some people, but it's not a good investment for us, and therefore we're staying away from Facebook, even though they changed their name and they're embarking into new territory. Thank you.